obviously when we buy, especially in the growth stocks with a buy and hold approach, it's obviously very important to get a good management. And one aspect I think which doesn't get too much attention is when you look at a management, try to think who's doing strategy and who's doing execution. So Warren Buffett also made this point that a lot of times when a person internally from the company is promoted to CEO, it is the equivalent of teaching a guy piano for many years and asking him to perform in a concert. And when he reaches the concert, you give him a violin to play. Because the guy who's grown through the company essentially excels at execution. But when he has to become the CEO and perform a good job there, the core expertise is as much capital allocation as much as execution is. In fact, you could say capital allocation is a bigger responsibility than execution. But the people who've been promoted internally haven't been trained in capital allocation. So, couple of companies which have worked well for us on a very long-term basis, we've been holding these stocks for almost 5-6 years now. What I realized what was common to these stocks, which is Motherson and Bajaj Finserv, is that there is a promoter and there is a CEO or someone who is executing. So there is a kind of segregation of roles, and there is enough bandwidth on both sides. There is the CEO, let's say Sanjeev Bajaj or Chand Sehgal, who basically focuses on the big stuff, M&A, capital allocation, etc. And then you have a set of CEOs or COOs who basically go and execute that strategy. If you have a management which is very good in one but not very good in another, I think then you have to be careful about owning the stock from a buy and hold perspective. Also, and I think this works for any style of investing, for any mutual fund, your personal portfolio, etc. Basically focus on some big ideas, because if you obviously diversify your bets too much, you're not likely to either beat the market or generate supernormal return. So when I looked back at our house, what we got right largely, I could just put in 4 points what we did well over last 4 years. So in 2000 first half, because the current account deficit was 6%, you moved into dollar plays like ID Pharma. In 2014, mid-caps became cheap, you bought that. 2015, you realized that the dollar was becoming stronger, yuan was likely to depreciate, and you kind of moved away from cyclicals. 2016 Feb, because of valuation, you moved back into cyclical. So obviously on hindsight, this is very, very easy, but the point I'm making is ultimately a lot of investing boils down to critical turn points, and your focus has to be very sharp at that point of time. If you miss those points, it's very difficult to create alpha otherwise. And finally, as Sid Klarman says, basically when you look at value investing, largely we are a value house with a contrarian approach. It is basically about a mix of psychology and economics. You need to have both. You can't just work purely on psychology or economics. So if you look at some of the stocks we bought from a contrarian perspective, 2 of them, for example, have worked. Hindustan Zinc and HPCL have multiplied. But something like Wipro hasn't worked for us. We've been holding the stock for 3 years. So here the important point is what doesn't work. You have to be careful it doesn't knock you out, in the sense that your weightage on stocks has to also be a function of financial and operating leverage of that company. With a company which has a good balance sheet and decent cash flow, even if you go wrong, you will not lose absolute capital. But if you want to put a bet on a company which has extreme financial and operating leverage, your bet has to be very small. So that is one lesson. which we focused on a lot.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/etnow.